Even at a lesser rate of productivity of potentially because of menopause, we're still damn good.
Maria Galve Villa, PhD, Research Fellow at University of Galway.
Hot flashes and night sweats occur to about 80% of women going through the menopause transition. But there's other 29 plus symptoms that start from changes on your nails, your hair. People develop eczema out of nowhere. You get bloated in your abdomen. Of course, it's been now coined the menopause belly, where you put another I find very disrespectful term.
Is that where you see women that have more, like it looks like they're almost pregnant?
We put on weight, but we actually put on weight around the abdomen because we go from a female hormonal pattern to a non-so-female, like a male pattern in a way. Where we put more fat is deposits in the abdomen.
I would actually argue that menopause research is longevity research. I definitely think for women, knowing more about what happens in menopause is really about, saying, well, I'm interested in longevity and I want to make sure that I can be, again, the best version of myself and the healthiest version of myself for a longer period of time. So I would argue that there is a lot of parallels there when you start to think about what is really longevity research, and especially taken through the lens of a woman, what does longevity research mean for us? And I think this is about navigating menopause, both mentally, but also physically, with as much help as possible.
Bonded by Science, proudly presented by Noble Blocks.
Maria, thank you so much for joining me this morning on Bonded by Science. I'm really excited to have you here. We do have a history together, and I'm sure that will come out in our conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks for the invitation. I'm delighted to be connected with you still after all those years in a very different capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Maria, I would ask you, what have you been doing for the last 5-10 years? But that would take the podcast, right? So let's say the last 12 months or so, what have you been focusing on?
So for the last 12 months, I've been trying my very best to translate science into an actual physical and commercially viable product that has come out of research. So translational science, suppose it could be the big headline, but my role has entailed anything that's to do with interviewing stakeholders, trying to understand business models, trying to understand how it works, how this device will work with users and with potential clients. And it's not your typical research job in academia, but it's definitely taken a lot of research skills that I've learned during my PhD.
Okay. Do you want to, can you think, what are the top 3 research skills do you think that you have leaned on the most since the completion of your PhD?
Well, first of all, I'm gonna take this podcast as a way of shouting and saying that I think PhD researchers are very much undervalued, and academics themselves, and they're very much put into a silo. And yes, all the transferable skills that we've learned, that we've put into practice during our academic years are extremely helpful in industry and other fields. Critical thinking will be one of them, because we're always thinking what's your bias? What are you trying to get out of here? What did you do to get these results? And trying to understand where was the bias, what could have got wrong, what could you do differently. But above all, it's a huge amount of problem solving. During academia, you're constantly meeting barriers, whether financial or their lack of research, and you really need to get on your feet and go into YouTube and talk to the experts and learn and read more papers and talk to more academics and other researchers to actually find the answers that you need to get to what you want within a very limited amount of time.
Yeah, so the one, of course, problem solving, I think, I agree there. Researchers just, they really nurture that skill with every 6 months or so. I'd say you make a jump in your problem solving abilities as a researcher. After that, though, I think the point that you made, there was 3 things you said, right? So problem solving. What
Critical
was the
thinking.
second? What, pardon?
Was it critical thinking?
No, it was, you know what it was that really struck a chord with me? It was the like not taking the data for face value. And I think that's like where a lot of commercial entities, they get some numbers and they just look at them, and then, some
Yeah.
of them don't even run statistics. And I
Yeah.
know we can
They
have a
just
huge conversation about whether statistics should be used
yeah.
generally in health research, but when you actually like put error bars on a graph, it can really change the shape of that graph. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. So I've seen like some companies try to put out data with no statistics attached to the plots, the data plots, and then I'm just looking at it going, either they left them off on purpose or they don't really have a true picture of.
I think it's a lack of understanding, and I think having been in a non-academic environment for most of my life, you do assume that the research is well done, and you do take it as, this is it. And only when you go into academia and you understand how hard it is to do research and how to publish, and you understand where the caveats and where things can kind of, let's say, deviate slightly and be modified, and then you understand, okay, this is, it should be up in a pedestal. It should be taken for what it is and really understood what the research question was and what the results really mean based on the methodology of the study.
Yeah, and I know what you say is true, because like we've all been part of studies and we know where all the weaknesses lie in the data. And I think that contributes to why a lot of scientists have earned the reputation of being very skeptic, because we know how, I don't want to say shaky, but we know how easy it is to tilt the data left or right in any data set, because we've seen it in our own data sets. But at the same time, I would say that a lot of people don't have the patience to read, like, what are the parameters around this data set that give it its strength, and where does it become, like, when does it become weak? Like, you can't shift it 2 centimeters to the right, because then it's like just untrue now, or it's just not backed up. So I think that's the problem. I think people want to see a data set and they just want to trust it, but they don't want to read the borders for which it stays valid. Yeah.
And for me that was a big shock into, when you're doing research, you really have to narrow down and really focus in a very small either population or group cohort. But that doesn't mean that the results will be applicable for a bigger or different cohort. And I think that was the challenge, and that still is the challenge of research and real world data, that we're all very different.
So I guess it is, like, to what extent then do you think these skill sets that you nurtured during your PhD, and I'm guessing some of them also came from your prior education because you are very well educated, how have they prepared you for like the startup world? Because you actually you have been participating in some startup competitions. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's it's a long answer, Shellie. How much time do you have?
We can always clip parts of it, so it's okay. You just go ahead.
Yeah. To keep it short. So my background is clinical. I've been working with, I'm gonna say, real world data all my life, and dealing with patients specialized in the area of complex and chronic or persistent musculoskeletal pain. And there, no matter how much you learn, every patient is different. If every person is different, because we might be looking at a sore back or a sore knee, but really in the pain ecosystem, we talk about the biopsychosocial model of pain. So we're talking about everything that is an external factor that is influencing our perception, our sleep, our mood, is influencing our perception of pain and how much pain we feel. So if we're doing some research in pain intensity, for example, and then we're forgetting to, let's say, control for other factors that are influencing the perception of pain, or we don't mention them, the results can be slightly different to what we would see in a real clinic with real patients. And even when you're trained as a physiotherapist, you're very much trained to focus on the musculoskeletal system. And then you're also forgetting about the psychological aspects of pain. So is trying to get the bigger understanding. And to go back to your question, it's the understanding that I have from working with real people and engaging with them and understanding their real problems. I'll listen to them, then wanting to academia and trying to see, okay, this research project is really, really interesting, but understanding that we're leaving all these other factors behind that we're not counting for. Therefore, more research is always going to be needed to get the big and real picture.
So, like most people, when I ask them if they ever felt prepared for a startup, they would be like, absolutely not. So what has been like, because I know you're sort of like, you have a bunch of different things on the go right now. Like I know you're doing a research study, and I know you're involved now with another organization that is advocating women's health. And I'm just curious to know, like, part of the projects that you've been working on, you've been trying to, as you said initially, like commercialize research findings. That is a startup. That is the beginning of a startup potentially, even if it's not like a company yet, or you're looking to see if there's actual potential there. So how has that process been for you?
Well, it's hard because you really have to wear a lot of different hats. You really need to wear your human hat when you're dealing with clinicians and patients and people who are suffering from, in our case, is women's health problems, what I call it menopause, recurring UTIs, and you need to understand their challenges. Then you have to put your commercial hat into, okay, how can I make money out of these? That is completely the opposite of the hat that you wear as a clinician, where you generally just want to help people. But yet, in order to make this solution or these projects commercially viable, it's all about the money. Where are you going to get the money and who's going to buy your product? So it is challenging, and it takes a lot of resilience. It's extremely uncertain, and you don't know what you're going to be doing from one day to another.
I happen to think from when I was earlier in my research career, I was always really nervous to talk about when you used to say money, right? But it's not really money. It's about how can you come up with a sustainable way to keep this product and service available for people that need it. And I think that when you spin it that way, which is probably a much more true reflection from where a lot of researchers are coming from, like, okay, I have this idea, it's either, it's got some substance behind it. And then suddenly you have to start talking about business models and how you're going to, as you said, generate revenue. And I think academics need to be more comfortable having those conversations. I actually found that clinicians and physicians were actually easier to have those conversations with, because they often are part of a clinic, and they understand that clinic, has a budget. So they understand that, money has to go somewhere. So I just think it's, how we phrase it, and if we want to make our research valuable to society, then we need to find ways to make it sustainable.
It's all about it. We have to understand that every bit of research that we're doing, that takes blood, sweat, and tears to get there, because making research is really, really hard. Making good research is even harder. We have to keep the focus on how is this research going to benefit society. And it's not just how many papers I'm going to publish with this. It's how is this going to make, I'm going to say, nearly the world a better place, because as researchers, we can actually, we can think that big. How is my little dot in this big ocean going to contribute to society and make it a better place? And then once we can answer that question is, okay, is this something viable? That the cost of producing this is is realistic in terms of making it a reality. And if it's not, that's your next research question. So how can I make this cheaper? How can I make this faster? And it's a fulfilling prophecy.
Would you say that now that you've gone through like even the beginning stages of, determining whether or not you can make something sustainable, that makes that in turn would make you a better researcher? Like, do you see more now than you did when like you were with me at the university? Because we spent a couple of years together. So
I do.
How do you?
I do. It is. And I think even if I reflect on my time as a PhD student, I was finding that I was very much focused on data collection. I was very much focused on recruitment, my participants, doing everything methodically so it could be sound and robust, because the goal as a PhD student was to publish. And that was it. There was not much more. There's not much more time to think about anything else. Speaking from my own personal experience, there's no more time to think the bigger picture afterwards. Or there's very little time, maybe towards the end, depends how things go, or whether you get hit by COVID or not, like it was in our case. You try to figure out how can these be used in order to actually help people, and then you start exploring and talking to other industry members. So, look, I have this idea. What do you think? And that's when you get hit by reality. So, okay, what I thought from my chair, in my desk, in my office, is not really what happens in the real world, and it's not applicable. So I do think that there should be a lot more engagement in research from an early stage, where different stakeholders get together and just say, this is great. How can this be utilized for the broader community?
So what was it actually, the research that you guys found that you said, hey, there's something that could be beneficial for a society by helping a lot of women? So yeah, I mean, that it is addressing society, right? Because women, we're 50% and we carry a lot of weight in society. So what was the research actually that you guys did it just like come up in your random feed, or is this something that you sought out?
It was by talking to people, talking to real people. I was in 2021, I was selected to be part of BioInnovate Ireland Fellowship. That's where they put a group of different people from different backgrounds together in a room. They pair us in groups, and what they did is that they give you a clinical area for you to just try to identify unmet clinical needs. So we were in the plastic surgery area, and we just decided to focus on one of the things we were looking into was breast reconstruction after breast cancer. So I started to try to speak to women who had gone through a breast reconstruction after cancer. And I happened to speak to one who was very young when she got her breast cancer. And as we were having a Zoom call, and she was in the middle of her PhD when she got her breast cancer. That's why she was very much eager to participate in any research that would help. And we started asking. Obviously, I was asking about her cancer diagnosis, on the tests and the surgery. And it turned out that in the middle of our conversation, she had a major hot flash, and she got really, really upset in front of me. So we started talking about that. I wasn't aware of that at the moment, at the time. She just started to complain. She obviously felt it was a safe place talking to me, and she said that she was sick and tired of being told that she was lucky to be alive because her cancer had been cut on time and she was technically in clinical remission. But yet she had been left with these induced menopause severe symptoms that were ruining her life, in her own words, and nobody was doing anything about it.
Okay, so is it a reality that some women that have breast cancer earlier in their life can have, I guess it's surgically induced menopause?
Medically induced.
Medically induced menopause. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Okay. I was completely unaware of that was happening. And like, what is the average age for, like, what is the age span for menopause? Do you know?
The average age for the onset of menopause is 51, but that completely varies.
She was in her 30s.
She was in her 30s, yes. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, but anybody who may have ovarian cancer, cancer in the uterus or the endometrius, that are estrogen sensitive, they would have to decrease their estrogen release, their own hormones, in order to be able to treat their cancer. So therefore, from one day to the other, either by surgically removing the ovaries or by taking specific medication, they land into what's called induced menopause.
This is very interesting. So the medically induced. So there's medically induced and surgical induced. And surgically induced would be that you would go under a surgery that would remove your ovaries, right? Okay, and I know that our ovaries are very well connected to our brain. So I understand that connection, at least on a neurophysiology level. But the medically induced menopause, can you put a few words on that?
It's exactly the same. They just give you some medication and they get your ovaries to stop working. So your ovaries still there, but you're taking medication, so you do not.
You don't ovulate.
Medically induced.
You don't go through your cycles.
You don't go through your cycle, exactly. So it's you're a young woman.
Okay. So how does it work then? Because I know that as women go through menopause, I know research and a lot of coverage for women that when they start to have like hot flashes and symptoms of menopause, they can apply for like estrogen replacement therapies or other types of hormones that can help stabilize certain things. But if you're then taking the patch, that would be essentially to reduce the estrogen. So how does that work? So I'm a little bit confused because I was quite enlightened to hear that you can take like replacement therapy to help stabilize a lot of the changes that can occur in your body that can happen during menopause and post-menopause. What do you call that?
Yeah,
post-menopause. Yeah. But then in this case, what would happen? How would you balance that? Because you're inducing menopause and then you have to replace it after, or
exactly. Let's kind of take a step out in the sense that we're going to call it spontaneous menopause, the one that happens naturally by age, spontaneously. And then we have the induced menopause that just happens literally within 24 hours because of surgery or because you're being given the medication. If you're having your spontaneous menopause, your hormones start to fluctuate gradually from your mid-40s. If they start fluctuating before your 40s, it's called early menopause. But it happens. But that's also spontaneous. So if your fluctuations start happening from your mid-40s, the fluctuations can change. 1 month you can be fine. 1 month you can, you don't really notice. It's not like one day you wake up, I have menopause today. It's not like that.
Excellent.
Get there. No, it's more subtle than that. Like a lot of women, we're not expecting it. Like we're just about, if you're lucky to have kids, so you're just about growing up your kids, and it potentially fits when your kids are starting to go through their own hormonal changes. And
that would be an interesting mix in the house.
It is called the sandwich generation.
Plus menopause. Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing is that when going through teenagers, you understand, just the hormones, the serotonin. But when menopause is the reverse of puberty, essentially. But it's not still very stigmatized and very taboo, because at that stage, you're supposed to be, professional. You're supposed to be this, you're supposed to be the other.
So that interview was a trigger moment for you to go down this particular path of, let's say, investigation. So it seemed like you were genuinely interested in women's health. Was there a reason for that, or?
I think it really shocked me. As a woman, I felt very identified with this person, I had recently completed my PhD. She had to drop out her PhD. There was a very big connection. She was also foreign and living in Ireland. I'm also a foreigner living in Ireland. So there was a lot of things that I felt, oh my, that could be me. And I could sense her frustration. It was one of those wake up moments to say, my mother 30 years ago was going through her menopause. She was really struggling. Are you telling me that we're going to the moon, as a tourist? There's nothing here. Nothing has changed. It was like, this can be right. So I said, maybe it's her doctors who are not treating her well. Straight away, I put the blame on the male doctors. And as you were describing that, but
it's not their fault. No,
it's not. There really aren't any tools. And these women, because they have estrogen-sensitive cancers, given hormone replacement therapy is not something that the consultants are very keen on doing. They can give some local estrogen, vaginal estrogen, to help with the symptoms. But there's up to recently, there's been no data onto showing anything. Like everything was going blind, and of course, doctors are very scared to give the reason why they had cancer in the first place, to try to treat symptoms. So they were given antidepressants. They were trying to give other medications that were, as a side effect, helping. But it just wasn't good enough. And that's how it all started.
So that's what got you started into focusing more on menopause. But the research that is backing, like, because you talked about that you've been really focused on translational science, meaning, bridging that gap. I don't even want to call it the valley of death. I think we need a different name for the gap that exists between research and startup world, or research and commercialization, because once you're a startup, then you get exposed to the valley of death. That comes later.
Absolutely.
So we need some other fancy name for this chasm that exists between research and someone that wants to try and bring that value further out into society.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing is there's a lack of information to follow on, and especially in women's health. As in, women's health has been misrepresented, underrepresented, undermined in history. So when you're actually going in to dig into what we found through research, is that there was this procedure that, as a side effect, this procedure has been done for years. It was invasive, and we found that out of pure chance. Some researchers found that it actually helped to decrease hot flushes and night sweats. And then somebody said, oh, that's interesting. So they took on and did some research about it. And it showed that it did decrease hot flushes and night sweats. But that's as far as we got.
Oh, that is interesting. And I suppose now, you have to go back and put your research hat on and pick up the research and actually really investigate if it's something that is truly there. So you've gone back to academia, essentially.
In a way, yes. In a way, as in what I did after BioInnovate is I actually put a business case together, without knowing the business case. And here in Ireland, there's something called Commercialization Fund, is funded by Enterprise Ireland, which is a public body through the universities. And they fund projects that have the potential to have commercial value. But you're still at university level. You just had a concept idea. So I wrote an application saying this is the problem. I had it validated by many, many key gynecologists and menopause experts, just to make sure that this is something that, if it was to become a reality, it would be used. There was no understanding of the mechanism of action, so I have to go to neurophysiologists and experts in the area to see why would this work, what's the hypothesis. It's a huge lack of information, is the value of lack of data rather than of the value of death. And then just try to put the pieces together. And thankfully, because of these funds and the way it's set up, I was able to get enough funds to get a project going for 2 years to try to develop proof of concept without having to publish or have other pressures that a standard academic would have.
Yeah, I think this is a really nice case to show that, you had some research that was going for a period of time. It found something interesting and novel. But there was at that time, there was nobody ready to like pick it up and take it forward. And it's just, it sounds like by coincidence that the right person with the right background stumbled on it because, you know, you were being funded by another organization that was saying, let's put a bunch of bright people in a room together and see what they come up with. So, I mean, I think in the end, it's a really, really nice story, but how often does that happen?
It is a very high risk story as well, in ways that, I mean, BioInnovate Ireland is funded also by other industry, medtech industry in the area, and Enterprise Ireland themselves. It is, you do get a stipend, so you do get paid because people are coming out of their very well-established careers, and they're put into this environment to try to do something. Everybody goes in there with high hopes, but really a lot of uncertainty. And is whether something happens is very high risk, but it can be very rewarding when somebody does come up with something that can affect the world.
So would you say that they actually encourage you to go and bridge that gap between academic research and commercialization? Like that's the whole point of this like setup that they've created. So it's not just that you're going to go and like make a new chocolate bar or like some socks to sell on the internet. Not that those are bad business ideas. Some of them do really, really well. But I'm just saying like it's more like it's focusing more on going like taking, you know, the energy and the effort, you know, and all that are, you know, well articulated knowledge that has been brought to a certain level, and then saying, well, if we just let it sit there, then it's worth nothing. But if we take it a little step further, then it could be worth a lot. And that's what they're doing. Is that right?
What they're doing is they're trying to get people who have shown in their career that they're adaptable, they're flexible, they have transferable skills, and that they're ambitious to look for what they call unmet clinical needs. These, in order to do that, we have access to hospitals for about 6 weeks, where we're observing, we're interviewing clinicians. But that means that the clinicians and the hospitals have to give us access. So it's a huge team effort that, as a BioInnovate alumna, I'm extremely grateful for, because talking to different people and getting different nuggets of information, it's really valuable to continue forming your ideas or to put something in the bin, which is also very helpful. So it's the whole ecosystem that thrives towards trying to find solutions.
And I suppose that's where your research skills really come in handy, because you can see all the missing points in the data set. And so you're forced to go and talk to all these stakeholders and, you know, fill in the gaps, whereas others may just say, well, this is enough, let's just go.
Yeah, and it's also a way of thinking of, you know, is this it? As a clinician, you also develop some body language skills where you can read the frustration of people, for example. And I found that really helpful, because as soon as you're interviewing somebody and you can see that twitch there, that the tone of voice changes, okay, that's something, come on. And you start pressing, and and sounds like really manipulative when I'm talking about this here. But in the middle of the conversation, it's a little bit like what you're doing. You can see that I'm getting passionate about women's health. You can see that I'm gonna give you a lot of better answers and more information if you press on something that I'm passionate about than if you ask me about, I don't know, the weather, for example. So it's exactly the same. It's about your interview skills, and you're trying to understand the person in front of you to try to get the information, unbiased information that you need
as best you can. Yeah. So in the journey, we've established that you have the interest for women's health, that you during the interview you became, you know, more aware. You followed that lead. What has been one of the biggest shockers for you to actually operate in this field? Because this is a specific niche area. It's a niche area of within medical research. I know that. But it's also a niche area for commercialization, you know, as a product. I mean, I learned recently that estrogen replacement therapy used to be like the biggest bestseller, like pharmaceutical intervention in like the 1950s or something like that. And then some other research came out, which
It was misunderstood.
Yes, because people didn't read the boundaries of the box. Yeah. And then that sort of like set back a lot of women's health research, particularly that related to menopause. So that was my biggest shocker. Like, wow, like we were really like people were cashing in on our problems. How do you see that now? Like, back up. What was your biggest like shock moment? Did you have a shock moment?
Well, the fact that we're still calling women's health a niche, that's a shock moment. To start with, we are, I think, technically 52% of the world's population. Really, women's health or men's health are not niche, they're health. Full stop.
Technically, we have more voting power if it was the way that we had kind of hoped it would be.
Okay, so just taking that from that, it is considered, unfortunately, a niche. And it's because it's been under-researched and underfunded forever. Even in the science itself, what I found the most shocking was to understand that women have been considered little men. And even for me growing up, I always thought men and women are the same. We just have different genitalia, may have longer or shorter hair, but we're the same, we're as good as. And as I've grown older, I understood the biology. It's like, we're not the same. We're very, very different. Our hormonal cycles that completely rule our life last 30 days. Male cycles last 24 hours. We're not the same in any way.
I didn't even know that men had a cycle.
No, it's just day and night.
Oh, surely that must be an understatement, though.
Yeah, I'm sure there's other things.
There's probably stuff. So we love you guys. Don't worry. That's funny.
But there is, it is a standing difference. And if you look at research, especially in pharma research, you realize that they're only dealing with men or male mice. And then they adjust to the weight of the smaller woman to kind of suit us.
For dosing purposes, usually.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you're working in the clinical area, you realize that women respond different to the same medication, especially with working in pain. Women will have more side effects. Just women tend to get more of the side effects or the negative aspects and the positive aspects of medication sometimes.
Is that like a general finding, or
that's an observational finding?
That's observational.
Dealing with, but if you look at it, if you talk to people, if you talk to women, they will say that is not getting the same effects because our metabolism is different. So they're not counting for that. Depends on where we are in the cycle. Our metabolism is also different. So they're not giving us different drugs depending on what time of the month we are, and that's why.
So that's kind of like raises the idea that, women are very underexplored, and I mean that in a sort of fascinating way, because if everything that we've been building on so far has been based on the biological sex of a male, then that kind of makes it really fascinating to actually go into women's health, because there's probably so much we still don't know about the biology of the human race, or of what it means to be human. And I think that's kind of exciting. In one regard, like, we're not done. Like, there's still so many gaps.
It's unbelievable. I mean, women in research, we've mostly been research as part of our fertility goals. But step outside of a standard pregnancy and the gaps, I mean, even now it's understood that having a painful period is not normal. Up to now, we just had to get on with it or put up with it. And if you had it, just probably be, hysterical, depressed, and a lot of other stigma attached to what is a genuine complaint.
Yeah, and I suppose I think there's been so many cases where we can say a lot of our complaints have been, I guess gaslighting has been one common phrase that's popped up a lot in the media in the last couple of years. I didn't even know what that term was for many years. I just feel like not only was I like, I'm so naive sometimes to certain things that were said and done, and you just accepted them. And I have a husband who's extremely understanding and extremely supportive partner, and and sometimes I see him say things and I'm like, oh, you just don't realize what you've said. And so we talk about it. But yeah, I think all of us have been so normalized, and like men included, right? So I know there's a lot of men that are super interested in women's health, and they recognize that they have mothers and daughters and sisters and whatnot, so they start to see it, and they really want what's best for all of us. So this isn't just a women's issue; it's a people's issue. Like, it's all of our issues. All right. So now that you've been diving more into this, like menopause, what is it? How does it affect you? I'm super interested in like the changes that occur in the brain, because that's, some of my background and training is in that area. Have you done anything personally different now? Because you recognize that in some point in your life, you will potentially experience this. I mean, you will, you will.
No, but the thing is that once you get into it and you really get yourself deep in, you realize, oh, that's why. So you can see that the hair texture is changing, my skin is changing. Like, this is not, I'm just getting old. This is part of my process of getting older. You do start to see little differences in how you tolerate different foods. For example, like, this shouldn't be an issue, but suddenly it becomes an issue. There's little slight changes that you just say, oh, just the once off, and then they repeat, and then you may go to the doctor and say, just imagining it. As it's meant, a lot of clinicians and women, we only feel that, oh, we've reached menopause when we start getting hot flushes or night sweats. But really, the journey can start a lot earlier. Not everybody can get hot flushes and night sweats. So through this journey of understanding what I'm getting myself into, it's not that far ahead. What I'm going towards is just trying to become a lot more aware of myself, not dismissing any signs or symptoms, understanding, noting them. I'm definitely a lot more strict in terms of writing down in the calendar I want to start to menstruate, and the quality and the quantity of it, something that I really wasn't that bothered. Food, what I can tolerate better, what I can tolerate not as good as I used to, and definitely trying to change my diet and my lifestyle to be in the best position that I can once I get full on to this menopause transition.
And that's understandable, because you you want to be the best version of yourself, right? You have your ambitions and you have your goals, and so you want to be able to operate to the best that you can for you. And I think, I recently became aware also when you said like writing down things that are going on with your cycle. So this is simply like, did you have a period? Was it light? Was it heavier? Like, those things can be really, really useful pieces of information just to be aware of. And it literally only takes like a second or two to jot it down in a 12-month calendar. Like, I think a lot of people still have like the wall calendars at home with some pictures that they really like to look at. So you could just put it on there, to put in your work calendar.
Yeah. and now for the new generation, there are apps that specialize in that. And I have 2 young kids, and I'm very much trying to educate them into the importance of writing and understanding your own menstrual cycle and how important it is, because it could be a sign of health or not health. And that's taking the biopsychosocial model in mind.
Do you think that it's like, there are other symptoms associated with menopause, right? Because I know people always say hot flashes, and like, that's it. like hot flashes. I actually had a friend of mine that said there was the movie. I think you probably know if I say it. It's called Sex and the City. Okay. And I'm bringing this up to make a point. It's, and I'm not saying go watch the film. Like, I'm not endorsing it by any means. But if you watch it, there is like one of the characters is going through menopause. And the only symptom that they talked about was the hot flashes. And she explained to me, like, she was really disappointed because she felt like that particular movie had the right demographic to explain and educate a little bit more that there was more to menopause than hot flashes, and that they failed to do so. And it's like, well, like, are we just so obsessed with clicks and like I really think, like, if you feel like you can learn something or get aware of something, and they just had the audience, like they had the right age group. Like Sex and the City was popular 20, 30 years ago. So they really, really had the right age group, and they failed to do so. And she highlighted that to me, and I was like, and I had seen it, but I didn't even notice it. So she saw it and I saw it, and she picked it up and I didn't because I wasn't at that stage in my life, but it would have been a perfect opportunity for me to know more other than a hot flash. So what, like, do you have other...
There's over 30 known, like 30 known symptoms of
30.
the menopause transition.
Wow. And we know like 2.
Yeah. So hot flashes is the one. Hot flushes or hot flashes, depends on where you are geographically, same thing. But they are the most visible and they're very debilitating, and they're visible. So you have, again, it's not invisible.
Like you get red. Like you
have people describe it as a sudden rush of intense heat spreading through your body like wildfire, and lasts between 30 to a couple of minutes.
What?
And yeah, like it's not just, oh, I'm a bit hot. No, it's a severe reaction.
It's not a reflex. Like, oh.
No, it's a very severe, and you start perspiring in the upper body mostly, and you could be giving a presentation, you can be in the middle of a meeting. Usually it's when you're under pressure of some kind that of course hits you more, but obviously it happens at any time. It doesn't have to be when you're under pressure. It happens at nighttime, happens when you're making dinner, it can happen anytime during the day. There's no pattern to it, but it's extremely debilitating. After having that rush of heat, you're left out of focus, you're left exhausted. So the consequences of having a severe hot flush are more than just a couple of minutes, but you're really, really hot. And if you have like 7, 8, 9, 10 a day, that they rule your life. You're aware constantly of when the next one is going to come, because you need to hide, you need to get changed, you need to cool down. It's not a nice way to live. And at that stage, we're having a professional career. It's not like you can hide. It's not like you want to hide anyway. But it is extremely challenging. Women are leaving their jobs. But that's the hot flushes only. But imagine that on top of that, hot flushes and it's occur to about 80% of women going through the menopause transition. But the other 29 plus symptoms that start from changes on your nails, your hair. People develop eczema out of nowhere. Different. You get bloated in your abdomen. Of course, it's the famous. It's been now coined the menobelly, where you put another I find very disrespectful term.
What was the term?
Menobelly.
Menobelly. Is that where you see women that have more, like, it looks like they're almost pregnant?
We put on weight. That's bloatedness as well, but we actually put on weight around the abdomen because we go from a female hormonal pattern to a non-so-female, like a male pattern in a way. And women are not, it's not like they're eating more or exercising less. It's just part of the change in hormones. Again, for some people, it's much more severe than for others. So we're talking about every bit of your body can be affected.
Yeah, and there's also brain fog. That was the other one that I learned. It's, I think, as you get older, you kind of, at least for being in academia and being like, it depends on what type of career you've had, but like So I'm a knowledge worker essentially. And, I also putter away on certain projects, which is more physical. But, I rely, like, my brain is my superpower, right? So to know that brain fog could be one of the symptoms that could really set me back. That kind of gives me a bit of worry, because, like, how do I mitigate that as an individual, because I really, really love what I do. And to not be able to do that because of my body, like, because I'm going through something that is very natural. How do you manage
I
that?
think it's a combination, and there's Dr. Lisa Mosconi is doing a lot of research into brain fog and the neurophysiological changes that occur with the hormone changes in the brain. And she's the first one nearly.
Where is she based? Do you remember?
Somewhere in the States.
Somewhere in the States,
She's really, really popular because she's finally talking about, we're not inventing this brain fog. There actually are changes showing that there are genuine changes in our brain, what we're going through this period. But brain fog, this sleep disturbance, our mood, we're more emotionally labile because of the hormones, the connection that our brain has to the emotional brain. So everything links in. You can't sleep. You're constantly worried about your hot flashes or your night sweats. Your memory is not the same because of your hormones, your productivity, and it's a really very negative spiral, and that we have to put up with. And the statistics are staggering, where women are reducing their working hours or retiring early
because of it. Yeah. Can you put a few more words on the relationship between menopause and memory?
Again, it's a bit of a data-free area, but it is one of the symptoms where we're just unable to find words. It's just there. It's a simple word or a name, something that we used to be able to be better at, and then so it's like, God, I used to be very good at remembering names, and now I completely blank, or I get them all wrong. That's how women are talking about it. But then you can do two things. You can laugh about it and say, well, it'll get better, or you can get really worried about it.
Please wear a name tag.
Yeah,
that would be great. See, I always have the sweat on, right? So people
would help.
They can just call me Boudreau if they forget my first name. But I love it when you go to networking events and people have name tags on, because it's just like, it's so nice if you have to introduce people that but you haven't seen them in like 2 years, and maybe their first name slips.
Yeah, I'm always looking at I'm almost squinting, saying, what's your name there?
Yeah. No, it's really great when that happens. So I love it when networking events put name tags on everybody. Super, super great. Is there a link between menopause and Alzheimer's? Because isn't this one of the ways that we sort of went back into menopause research, was because women are statistically suffering more from Alzheimer's as a disease compared to men, and then they were looking for, like, what is a potential causal link for that, and then it doesn't rule out like why men get it, but it does shed light on why more women might be getting it. And so that was why I was kind of interested in talking about memory, because I find that I make up words all the time. Like, if I can't remember like what a word is now, I just make up a new word. And this is like a big thing in my family. So I have like my whole new word list, and I love it when other people make up new words too. So on one of my feeds the other day, I saw something. It was the word ambitious. So it was like, so because I love making up words, and it came in my feed, and I was like, oh, that's hilarious. So like a woman that wants to be more ambitious, she wants to be a better, BICTH. So I thought, oh, that's hilarious. So I make up words when I can't remember them. I don't necessarily know if that's because I'm like transitioning into some stage, or it's like a super, super like 20, 30 year early symptom for Alzheimer's. It might have something to do with, living in a dual language environment, right? So you're bouncing between the two languages. So that's always what I have attributed to. But yeah, how much have you read up on that link between menopause and Alzheimer's?
There is a very, very good paper, and I spoke to the author there last week actually, and I asked her about any bias that I had potentially read in the article, and she was very good and very nice to answer all my questions. So there seems to be a link between the severity of hot flushes and eye sweats, which is called vasomotor symptoms altogether, with a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's or cognitive impairment conditions and cardiovascular disease. So it's the severity of your symptoms that seems to be the key here to potentially developing. And that links very nicely with Dr. Mosconi's research as well, which is also linking the changes that happen during menopause to the brain. So it's really important that we look after ourselves more than ever with the research that we know now, rather than just have the old-fashioned way of I just have to put up with it.
Yeah, I would actually argue that menopause research is longevity research, because longevity has become like a super hot topic for funding. It's like, it's permeating through social media. Like, what are all these biohacks? And I definitely think for women, knowing more about what happens in menopause is really about, saying, well, I'm interested in longevity, and I want to make sure that I can be, again, the best version of myself, and the healthiest version of myself for a longer period of time. So I would argue that there is a lot of parallels there when you start to think about like what is really longevity research, and especially taken through the lens of a woman, what does longevity research mean for us? And I think this is about, navigating menopause both mentally but also physically with as much help as possible.
Yeah, and that help has to come from everywhere and everybody. Starts by us, obviously, but there has to be some changes in the workplace. There has to be some changes by society. And of course, we have to be able to talk about it and not be stigmatized. As in the UK, I think it was last year, there was a woman that went missing, and suddenly the media started talking about, oh, she was going through menopause, and then they put the tag of mental
the
health.
suicide, yeah.
And that was extremely sad, but also very, very incorrect.
What? Like, the jump is crazy.
Yeah. So they got a lot of backlash in that. So there's still a lot of work to do to talk. I mean, it was good in a way because it got people talking about menopause and mental health, but the connection there was so wrong. But we really have to be, everybody has a part to play in terms of education, breaking down the stigma, and actually making the world suitable for everybody.
Yeah. Also in the work environment, I think it's quite nice to know that, like, if you're having that, and I'm going to say hot flashes because now we're back to like the most common symptom, that you don't have to feel embarrassed about it, because it can really shake your confidence. Anyone. I mean, it would be like a guy pissing his pants, right? So like, it's almost the same. So so we need to make space for that in our society, also because our workforce is getting older. So this will become more common. So it might just be that it'll get pushed in, like whether we're accepting or not, it'll just be like, well, you don't really have a choice now because, we're here and we're not going anywhere. So we're going to bring our hot flashes with us.
And you want to keep your experience and workforce, the one that have been with you and have been loyal and have all the experience, and they're female, you want to keep them. You need to make they want to stay. So just let them stay. Don't make them feel that they're not suitable or not good enough because now they're going through this absolutely very natural period that we all have to go through. So make allowances for them. We want to continue there. So,
but how would you, because if we were going to be like really hard with the numbers and say, well, maybe they're not as productive anymore. Because if someone's looking at the bottom line, they're going to be like, well, I can hire someone else that's not, and then I can get more out of that person, pay them the same. So I think this is where it gets really difficult, because some decisions are made on a financial basis only, and others are not. So how would you, like, if you met me and I was like, no, this is just a financial decision, this is not personal.
Yeah, well, I would question.
How would you combat me at that moment?
I would question your numbers to start with, and I would say, hiring somebody new that is going to be the right fit for the company, training them to the level of the employee that you have now, and to the speed at which they're working now. Because even okay, and I'm putting my hand on fire here, maybe being controversial, even at a lesser rate of productivity of potentially because of menopause, we're still damn good.
We're still pretty good. Yeah.
So getting the financials of having to fire the person who's been there for X amount of years and train somebody new to the level of this person, I think cost effectively, that's probably not a very smart way of working.
And you won't get the loyalty that you really want out of
you're going to show to the rest of your employees.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing that I learned recently, because I was super interested in our conversation today, so I came across some research that talks about how post menopause, like the activity levels that you would measure during like an fMRI, so like when your brain is lighting up like a pinball machine, basically, that the activity levels they go down compared to pre. And there's not a lot of data on this. Like, we don't have tons of brain scans to show this, but it seems to be a general trend. And I would argue that it still doesn't mean that the pre is lower than the average. Like, we forget that even though you have a change in time. So like you said, like women have a 28-day cycle. So in that cycle, like our brains also oscillate in terms of like its ability to be like it's basically to metabolize. I don't think metabolize is the right term, but to metabolize ATP and to really like, get your energy and all that kind of stuff. So, fuel your cells in the body. So that cycles. And because it cycles, it might mean that our baseline is just equivalent to a male baseline. So when I saw that study, I was like, I felt like they overlooked the possibility that the pre-post is just going back down to baseline, rather than saying that now we were at a baseline and now we're just lower. And I would just like to put that out in this podcast, because I think until it's disproven, it's not that we're operating at a lower margin or a lower level. We're just not going through those peaks anymore. Yeah. So have you read any of those studies? Because
I've read some of those studies, but I think, again, like a lot of research, they are failing perhaps to see the big picture. The big picture, seeing the changes that we're going through with our cycle that have been irregular for years before we become postmenopausal. So there has to be some changes there. But the body is really, really adaptable. That's how we keep functioning. So that doesn't mean that we're less, whatever word that we're using. But also, because of the lack of estrogen, unless we do something about it, our muscle mass decreases. Muscle burns a lot of energy. So it's really interesting how the whole systemic effect could have an influence in results, and they're not even looking at the person.
Right. Because, okay, so there's like brain volume, and then there's connectivity, and then there is activity levels. So all of those are influenced by what's going on in your body. But it also can be a representation, like a lot of my prior research was in like neuroplasticity and learning, and like as we age, we can still learn a lot of new things. And the more you learn, the more the new connections you make, and that can influence your ability to think and articulate, and like we should never really stop learning is what I'm saying, because that always promotes new growth. Not in the same way that we're just like making new neurons, but it definitely promotes growth, and it promotes connectivity, and it promotes reorganization. So I've always been a huge advocate of that. And I think that's also something that can help with the whole longevity research side, is that if we are going through these phases, that we need to make sure that we keep challenging ourselves as individuals. We keep learning, taking on new skills, learning a new sport, taking up Pilates or whatever, anything that is like coordinating movements, that is learning new skills. It could be an instrument, it could be singing.
Anything that needs to be, that requires adaptability from our body will require changes. That will lead to learning.
Yeah. And so a lot of that, like those, sports science biohacks could very, very much feed into potentially mitigating some of the findings that they're observing in these women. Yeah, wow. So what is on the next, like, what's your next year's plan? Like, you recently started a new position, isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm engaging with another company called Live UTI Free, which they're advocacy company for women, for men and women who suffer from recurrent urinary tract infections or UTIs. And again, just trying to break the stigma. I think is extremely interesting how something as simple as a urinary tract infection or a UTI has been completely mismanaged and misdiagnosed for years. And it's only now that someone, still not general knowledge, has understood that we just have such a big gap in knowledge that we've been mistreating or potentially mistreating millions of people with recurrent UTIs.
Okay. Because I think a lot of people have experienced an infection at some point in their life, and it's super unpleasant. Can you, like, when you say a lot of people have been mistreated, is this because, like, can you shed some more details on that?
Still earlier stages in this new role, so I'm still learning, but to give a general concept of the idea is when somebody has a symptoms of a urinary tract infection, you go to your doctor, you give a urine sample, do a dipstick, right? And that dipstick, or even they send a culture to the lab if, as a more advanced level, that culture only reads a small amount of bacteria that could be causing your infection. Now, if your infection is caused by something else that is not accounted for, then that result is negative. So according to the lab, you do not have a UTI, you're just
itchy,
complaining.
pain.
And they have another term when they can't find the bacteria. But what happens is that sometimes they start giving them random antibiotics just to see, do they hit jackpot, and that creates more resistance, and that increases the problem even more. So, it's not the nice way. So there's some research, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's some research going on now to try to actually understand what is the normal urogenital microbiome in the area for healthy people, and then what are the changes that happen for people who start to experience symptoms, and try to identify that there's a whole lot of other strains of bacteria that we've never heard of that has the capacity of causing UTIs. And if you had one of these bacteria, you get the antibiotic, your recurrent UTI is not longer recurrent, it's treatable.
It's cured. Yeah. Okay. So what you're saying then is that the spectrum that they look for is too narrow, and they need to widen it. And if they did widen it, then they could get the right prescription faster, and a lot of people would be, pain-free, symptom-free.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
But that's still knowledge that is not very known. Working as a clinician, as a physician, as a consultant is really, really hard. We see a lot of patients on a recurrent basis. We have very little time to pause and catch up with the latest evidence and what's out there. you're meant to do it, but it's just not physically able. There's so many new things coming up that you try to focus on some areas. So there's still a huge amount of work to do in terms of advocacy and getting people who suffer from them and clinicians to understand that things are changing and there's more evidence out there.
But this brings us back to where we started, right? So it's like there's a lot of research. Some research does come out which would indicate A, B, or C, but there's still no one that is picking it up and trying to really push that out. Because like what you're talking about now is that, you know, hospitals and clinics, they need to change the way that they're doing stuff. And that's change behavior for clinic. And anyone that has done any change behavior research knows that's really hard. So it's like, you know, you really need someone that is very strong-willed, determined, and funded to go in and say, this research says this, we need to change. And because unfortunately, there's so many other ways for companies to make money or to generate revenue. Why would anyone choose such a hard path? And I think that's just the reality of the situation, right? Like, we don't need any more kitchen gadgets. I mean, I think we have enough. So let's we need to find those people, and we need to fund them, and we need to support them, and we need to allow them to be very determined.
Yes, but it's not just that, I think, because there's a massive study ongoing at the moment, and they're getting very interesting results. But then it's the translation aspects. Then it goes back to the commercial aspects of it. How can we make it accessible to nations? How can we make it accessible to women? Is this a device that can be used or should be used for in pharmacists, for example? Because clinicians are such time pressed. Yes, point of care in some pharmacies, for example. How can we innovate in a way that we can help people and not overload people who are already overloading, who want to help but they can't? What are the ways? If there's a barrier, can you go around the barrier to get to what you want?
Yeah, I think that's a really good subject that you brought up, is about, you know, changing the point of care. So making more points of care outside of, you know, secondary, tertiary, you know, support within the healthcare system. So yeah, I like empowering the individual. I know that's a very overused word, but you're really actually allowing people to take more control over their own health. And yeah, putting it out to the pharmacy would make a lot of sense in this particular case, especially, of course, if the test was so good and there was enough trust between how you ran the test. I think that's the problem, right? It's like, we could have this test as 100% accurate, 100% reliable, like the best numbers you could hope for. And that person has to take it home and pee on the stick. And then, but how do you verify that it was that person? Not that anyone's probably seeking, you know, UTI medication for whatever reason, but it does open up the subject of like, how do you make sure that trust stays intact? And when I say trust, I just mean truth. Like, how do you make sure that the truth is?
And that's always going to be a challenge, no matter where.
Is that what you guys have experienced? Like, is that a barrier, do you find?
No, I think the people, nobody, I haven't met anybody yet who wants to take antibiotics just because.
That's good.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that I haven't come across anybody like that. But I have come across people who are desperate because they just can't get the help they need. Now, let's say you go to your local chemist, because we all have a local pharmacy or chemist near enough from our place of residence or our place of work, and you can buy I'm just brainstorming here. You can buy a test tube there, the pharmacy sells it to you, and you can pour your first morning stream of urine. The next day, you bring it to the chemist, they put it in a machine, and then just gives a report of like, this is what you have, and this is the antibiotics that will be helpful for you. And then the pharmacy can dispense them for you. sends a letter to the GP with the report, and then everybody's in a better place.
Yeah, and there should be like a class of symptoms that would allow for those lower hanging fruits to exist in the healthcare system. Yeah, because of course you want to make sure that, and the pharmacists are actually super, super well educated. And I remember learning, like when I was going through my PhD, also in my postdoc career, as a like someone that was operating under the umbrella of just of pain science, let's say, that I realized how underutilized pharmacists were. Like they are so incredibly talented, intelligent individuals. They have so much responsibility, and they're just dispensers in the end. And I also find, like, when I go to a pharmacist and I'm picking up something, they are so helpful. They really want to make sure I understand the medicine that I'm taking, or they really want to, like, ask into, like, stuff. And I'm like, and it's like they're more interested in me than sometimes my doctor has time to be interested in me.
Yeah, and the same with the nurse practitioners. If you have a nurse in your GP practice, they also have a lot of knowledge. They probably also kind of just doing the little bit of work, but they have more time to discuss things. And I do think that in healthcare, there's a lot of professions that are kind of underutilized, undervalued, and there's a lot of role distribution, but there's also so much administration that nobody talks about that are extremely time consuming.
But that's because of the IT systems, right? Because if we had better supporting infrastructure where information was more shared between these underutilized professionals, then it would actually be easier for them to always stay more informed. I know, like you lived in Denmark for many years, so you have an understanding of our system, which is considered like at the forefront, together with a couple other countries, like Norway, for example, is also quite advanced in digital health. So do you see that, like, as digital health becomes more advanced globally, that we will actually be able to change, like, the point of care?
I think the problem with extending digital health is the high risk of some sensitive data being shared or misused or hacked. That could be in trouble. And one of the things that we experience when we live in Denmark is not only that you can make all your appointments digitally without having to speak to anybody, but also if you have a prescription, your GP will just press a button and it'll go to your local pharmacies, and you just had to not even speak to the pharmacist, just hand your card and you get handed your medication. I've lived in 2 other countries and that doesn't happen. But it is the beauty of digital health in a way. But at the same time, if all my information was not only to be shared with my GP that I've given him or her in confidence, is also shared with the pharmacist, more information that maybe I didn't want them to know because it's my friend and works there, or to the other, let's say, physiotherapy practice because it's painkillers for my knee pain. But yet I've disclosed some information that I don't necessarily want to tell my physio. It's where does the line, where is the barrier? Where is my confidential information stays confidential?
Yeah, I think there are actually some companies that are working on, like, permission, because you have, like, permissionless information transfer and then you have permission-based transfer. And, like, some of that can still be in your control, even if you have a digital health system set up. I don't think it's that advanced yet, but the technology to enable that does exist. And the technology that you could track whoever got access to your information, that exists as well. So maybe it's just a matter of, again, finding those determined people and getting them closer to the boundaries or the borders of academia and funding them. That will help. This has been really, really enlightening for me, and I hope that yeah, you were able to talk about the things that you felt were really close to your heart. I'm wondering if I like didn't ask you a question that you were hoping that I would ask, and if I did, like, what is that question? Is there anything that you think that we went through maybe too superficially that you would like to touch on?
No, I think the only thing that I'm thinking of right now is how do we bridge the gap from academia to something, a commercial product, or somebody who has an entrepreneurial mindset to be able to take that on. I do generally think that because I had an academic and research background, I was able to read the publications, analyze them, go in detail with them, not be afraid to contact the correspondent author and ask them more questions if I wasn't satisfied, compare to different articles that were saying completely the opposite, to try to unbias myself, understand my own biases, doing my own research. So all that really was really helpful to try to yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, in terms of moving forward fast towards finding solutions and evidence. I do think that from an academic perspective, when you're in academia, you don't write for others. You need to write for yourself, no matter how much you try.
Yeah, you write for that community. Yeah, so there's something that could be said, like, and done with the incentive structure for communicating science that comes out of academia. Like, one of the things that I would like to see more is like that we really do emphasize, like, what does your research bring in terms of value. And it's always, like, as an early academic, I always felt that to be such a difficult task. And if you go back to a lot of research papers, you'll see that they have the same conclusions, like more research is needed, or this may help improve rehabilitation therapies for X type of patient. So we often tend to land on very soft conclusions because we have to stay so general. So I do agree, like, there needs to be more push for getting that translation out. This is also why I really liked clinical research, because the clinicians often demanded that from you, because they didn't like it if you wasted their time, because their only objective was to help their patients. So if you couldn't convince them pretty quickly, what this research project was going to bring, then they just didn't have time for you. So I definitely saw that there should be more of that. There should be more abruptness. There should be more accountability. And some of it starts with adding that extra layer of, like, so what to your research paper? Like, so what? Like, what does it bring?
Yeah,
like, what does
and I
it
think,
bring?
and that goes also into the journals that are publishing the papers.
Yeah.
As in, when we're submitting an article, we're all terrified that it's not going to go through, because the ultimate goal is required as our KPIs to have a published article. So we always, it's on the low risk and making sure our wording is very softly so it could not be misinterpreted. But sometimes we may have to take risk and say, look, I'm taking a big risk and I'm going to say that this has the potential to help, and that should be allowed, or maybe not in a publication, but maybe there has to be a different way of publication that is not behind a paywall, that is, more for the potential different readers that are not in academia.
Yeah, like the commercial side or the business side or the, different stakeholders. So there's not always about entrepreneurs. Like, it could be decision makers, policymakers, a lot of people that are having to, update regulatory regulations, because we know that
even industry, it could be someone that may help to another big company and said, actually, this is something that we could take on because we have the money, we have the resources. But I then be able to access that researcher that let that article or that information in order to ask questions, so they could get involved into actually making something more tangible.
Yeah, I honestly don't know any body or any asset that is so underutilized than the amount of papers that are sitting in literature right now. Like nobody else, no other company would just let them sit there. Like, the amount of effort and money and funding and time and talent that's sitting in in all those publications. It's unreal.
It takes a huge amount of effort to go through the ones that are free, and then you just met with a paywall for some other ones. Like, come on, I'm really trying to do something here, and you can't access them. And it really shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, because then you have to reach out to the researchers, right? And I find that a lot of researchers are pretty, like, they want their research to be adopted and utilized, so you can reach out to them. I always thought it was a really big compliment, like when someone wants to read your paper and makes the effort to write you an email. You're like, oh, really? You want to read more? Here, have the whole book. Yeah. So,
but you have to make that. It was that extra step. Sometimes time is. Nobody has the time. And if you're met with a barrier, you cannot really have to assess, is it worth it or not? Has this person, can I find the email quickly and fast? Yes, no. Do I have to go and spend a whole day researching this other author to try to find the article? Is this article very old? Is this person still working there? So it's not that straightforward.
I think it would be fun to have something called like frank interpretations of research, like just frank. We just call it frank. And then it, it's like where we interview the researchers on the one paper, or maybe two if they're combined.
Yeah. And what do you really think about this?
Like what did you really want to say that you couldn't put in the paper? And then let's talk about that. I think that could be a lot of fun. So yeah, so Maria, like when your next paper comes out, we'll do a frank interpretation. And yeah, I wish you guys best of luck for that study, because I think that the goals are they're really noble. And yeah, I mean, if there's any way that I can help you, please don't hesitate to ask. And I can't wait to learn more about it when you're able to share more. I know you have to keep things a little bit quiet at the moment. Yes. But there should be more people like you.
Yeah. Oh, people like you aiming to disseminate the information as well, and breaking barriers. And
yeah. So we can just say like menopause 3 times in a row, and people won't go, ooh, what is that? So
I know.
Yeah.
Very applicable there.
Maria, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today, and to let people in on your life and let people know what you're working on. So I think it's really valuable.
My pleasure. Thanks a million, Shellie, for the invitation.